Oftentimes, when people are going through a divorce and they seek my advice and they sign up for the Divorce Girl Smiling free consult, they say things to me like, my ex is so immature. I can't talk to him. He's unreasonable. He doesn't know how to listen. We could never communicate. He's crazy. He's a narcissist, things like that. And I think what the people are talking about is that they think that their spouse has a lack of emotional maturity. So if you're listening to this and you're like, yes, emotional maturity, he doesn't have that. This is what this podcast is about. And I have a great guest on here. Her name is Teresa Vieira. Teresa is a divorce attorney, an arbitrator, a certified mediator, and the founder of her practice based in North and South Carolina, named, okay, I'm going to start that whole thing over. And I have a great guest for
Okay.
this. His name is, okay, ready? My guest to talk about this is Teresa Vieira. Teresa is a divorce attorney, an arbitrator, a certified mediator, and the founder of her practice, Modern Legal. They service North Carolina and South Carolina. And Teresa wrote this article called Dealing with Emotionally Immature Adults in Divorce. Hi, Teresa.
Hi, Jackie. Thank you so much for having me today.
I loved your article. I'm so happy to have you. Do you agree with me that when people come to see you or your clients, they say those same things? Like, he's so hard to talk to. He's impossible to communicate with. He's such a jerk.
Yes, we see that unfortunately a lot. And it's not even just for the initial consultation. Unfortunately, we see that type of tendency throughout the litigation process or mediation process. And it's critical to really understand what emotional intelligence is to at least wrap our heads around and accept this reality.
All right, so let's start with this. What exactly is emotional maturity?
That's a great question. And what I like to start out with is comparing it to other forms of maturity. So, for example, we look at the physical maturity of a child as they grow, right? We have comparables for a 3 year old or a 6 year old as they grow. Maybe it's their height, maybe it's their weight. We also have maturity factors when it comes to social maturity. Maybe that's how many friends are does a child have or an adult have, or maybe that's also how are people conducting themselves in relationships. And if they're socially mature, maybe they won't insult someone as often, for example. Well, think of emotional maturity as just another part of identifying maturity for an adult. And it comes back to emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is the ability and capacity to understand and manage our emotions while also understanding the impact and influence we have on the emotions of others. And someone who has a high emotional maturity is able to not only understand and manage their own emotions, but also understand how their responses to other individuals affect their emotions.
All right, how important is emotional maturity to, like, let's say, just having like a good life, being successful in business, having good relationships? I mean, to me, it's kind of a loaded question. That's like the most important thing you can have.
I would agree. I think we sometimes glaze over how important emotional intelligence is because I think there's almost an understanding of, well, everyone has their own emotions and they are, sometimes unpredictable. And some people just don't have control of their emotions, not realizing, well, yes, it has to do with a certain level of maturity or immaturity in everyone's lives. And I do honestly believe that emotional intelligence is critical to have a full and successful life all the way around.
And what are some reasons why somebody would lack emotional maturity?
That's a
Or,
great question. And I mean, similar to, I would say almost everything in life that we can trace back to our childhood. So, for example, if a child is malnourished, maybe they won't physically mature how they should. If a child is not exposed to other children when they're younger, maybe their social maturity will not improve as much as we would desire. Same thing for emotional intelligence. If a child is not exposed to an emotionally supportive and safe environment, then that child may lack emotional maturity as they age and grow older.
All right. So what you're saying is like, and you wrote this in the article, a person's emotional maturity or immaturity is exposed most often when the person is under severe stress. So let's say they didn't get this enough support as a child, then when they grow up, if they're under severe stress or they're trying to be in an intimate relationship, the emotional maturity just isn't there because they never had it growing up or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I would even make it more basic than that. A lot of times, and I even work through this, sometimes we can't even identify our own emotions. So, for example, a child is running, they fall on the ground and they start crying. Are they crying because it hurt? Or are they crying because it was scary? Or are they crying because they're frustrated because they didn't get the goal or whatever they were pursuing when they were running, right? And frustration is very different from anger, and anger is very different from pain or being scared. Like there's so many emotions out there, that's just a handful of them. And if a child is not taught to identify their emotions from a young age, then how can we really expect adults to understand what they're going through and identify their emotions when they get older? And
Yeah.
then, yeah.
I was just going to say it's so interesting because a lot of times I hear therapists and divorce coaches say, name the feeling. If you can name the feeling, it helps you get over it. Even as adults,
Mm-hmm.
they really they're getting divorced and they're feeling a million things and they don't really know, they can't explain it, they can't name it. And so that's why, tell me if you agree with me, that therapy is so important during a divorce because it can really help you through it to help you with your emotional maturity.
Agreed. Agreed. And I would say, similar to how we always have room for improvement for our health or physical fitness, we always have for improvement when it comes to our emotions and emotional maturity.
Absolutely. And I want to say one other thing before we move on to the characteristics of an emotionally immature person. But I want to say that I have heard this from a therapist that people with addictions, their emotional maturity stops when they get the addiction. So let's say
Mhm.
somebody's been an alcoholic since they were 25 years old. They are emotionally, they stay the emotional age of 25, even if they're now 45 going through a divorce. They're still living as a 25-year-old when it comes to emotional maturity. Do you know that for a fact? Have you heard that? Does that make sense to you?
It definitely makes sense. I mean, any adult or any person can be stunted in growth in any category, really.
Yeah.
And that totally makes sense, especially with addictions, because it is a mental health or substance use disorder that we're dealing with. And when that arises, that prevents the person from being able to develop in other ways, especially when it comes to emotional maturity. I'll go one step further. I do think that should expand to being a victim of abuse. And so, in situations where domestic violence and or child abuse exist, you see the stunting of emotional maturity early on if a child is exposed to both.
You're listening to the Divorced Girl Smiling podcast. My name is Jackie Pilosoff, and I'm your host. And today I'm here with divorce attorney Teresa E. Vieira. Teresa is an attorney, arbitrator, certified mediator, and the founder of her practice, Modern Legal, based in North Carolina. They serve North and South Carolina. Teresa and I are talking about emotional intelligence, emotional maturity, and we're going to get into the characteristics of emotionally immature adults and then how to deal with an emotionally immature person, especially when you're going through a divorce from them. So we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Divorce Girl Smiling podcast. My name is Jackie Pilosoff, and I'm your host. Are you getting divorced from someone you feel is emotionally immature? Are you not sure? That's what we're talking about today. My guest is Teresa Vieira, divorce attorney, arbitrator, certified mediator, and founder of Modern Legal, her divorce firm in North Carolina. And Teresa, before we move on, how does somebody get a hold of you if they want to consult with you or talk to you further about this or rep have you represent them?
Sure. Thanks, Jackie. First stop, I would say, is our digital storefront, modernlegalnc.com. So feel free for anyone interested in learning more about our services and pursuing legal representation for a family law case in North Carolina, South Carolina, to check out our website. We are also very active on our social media platforms. So check us out on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Pinterest, and many more. And finally, our phone number is 704 286 6302.
Okay. And what I love about Teresa is you're so relatable. I mean, listen to this conversation. You really are someone who listens well, you are experienced, but also you're very compassionate. And I don't want to tell my listeners that you should call Teresa, to talk about your emotional issues, because that's not really her wheelhouse. Well, I shouldn't say it's not really, it's definitely not. And you don't want to be paying a divorce attorney for their time when you're talking about issues that you have with your spouse emotionally. That's why a divorce coach or a therapist is such a great fit, or both, for someone getting divorced. But the reason we're talking about this is if you're listening and you're thinking, you know what? Yes, my ex is really emotionally immature and I really need to get some help for myself because obviously you can't control the other person. You can only control yourself. This is a great podcast to listen to. Let's get into the characteristics. What does an emotionally immature adult look like? So, in the article, you list 6 characteristics. The first one is they're egocentric and self preoccupied. Tell me about that.
Sure. So, someone who is egocentric and self preoccupied really focus on how things affect them and not necessarily anyone around them. They don't necessarily appreciate or understand how other people's emotions could be affected by their behavior. Now, that's not to necessarily jump to the conclusion that they're a narcissist, and I like to reserve the narcissism identification for the mental health professionals because it is a personality disorder. But for emotionally immature people specifically, it's all about them and not necessarily about others.
And if you think about it, that's how a kid acts. And a kid, a young child, is expected to act that way. But as you mature and grow, it's not all about you. And if you are emotionally immature, obviously you're still acting childlike.
Yeah.
The next one is poor empathy. It's hard for them to relate and feel what others may be feeling. They're unable to walk in the shoes of another person.
Yes, exactly. So when they exhibit poor empathy, when someone is telling a story, for example, they may not actually understand that person's journey. A great example is I've seen this often when a woman is not able to bear children, and especially for men who are biologically not able to bear children directly. An emotionally immature male could respond negatively with poor empathy to that female situation, especially in the context of, well, you should just have children and that will help you live a full life, for example.
Okay, what about in the context of divorce? Let's say you're getting divorced from someone who's emotionally immature and they're not able to understand what you might be feeling. It's all about them.
Hmm.
And they're not able to say, wow, she is now a single mother who hasn't worked in 8 years. Let me think about what might be going through her mind, which, by the way,
Oh,
someone who didn't work for 8 years and had two kids and was a single mom. And I was scared out of my mind
yeah.
to go back to work. And maybe somebody's ex doesn't understand that. And they say, she just needs to get on LinkedIn and get a job. I don't
Yep.
know what is the holdup. They're not understanding.
Yeah. Well, and I would say there's the realist expectations, right? So it's in reality, yes, you have to probably apply to a lot of jobs to get one. And maybe the other person doesn't understand that because they got the first job out of college and they're still at it. Um,
Right.
there could be the reality of the schedule shift. Now, all of a sudden, that parent has to go to, six different extracurricular activities for the children when they used to be able to split it. And that's a lot more of a load or burden, if you will, to time and schedules. But go one step further, that's just the reality, the realistic or realist changes in a situation. What about the emotions, to your other point? What about the emotions related to that? The frustration of, oh my goodness, soccer practices at 5, but then cheerleading practices at 5:15 and they're on like separate sides of town. How am I going to do it? And that very real, overwhelming feeling that happens when you're transitioning from a coupled situation to a divorced or separated situation.
I have been in that situation so many times I can't even count. I'm like, how am I supposed to be here at 5:15 and in another place at 5:20 and they're literally 20 minutes away? So I get
Mhm.
it. Okay, next characteristic of an next characteristic of an emotionally immature adult. They tend to be afraid or nervous of emotional intimacy or deep connections.
Yes. And you can, I don't know, I feel a lot of individuals, if they're still in the dating field, they may actually spot these as quote unquote red flags. So for example, all the conversations that you have with this individual, or at least most of them, may be very much about the weather, what's going on with their favorite sports team, very surface level, not deep, not how's your relationship with your father? Because I understand he left the house when you were 10 years old.
Mhm.
Or how do you feel about your mother who apparently is going through this medical operation here shortly? Like how do you feel? And when an emotionally immature person is confronted with that type of question, they try to avoid it. They'll respond in ways of very short responses or very deflective responses. Oh,
Or
she'll be
make a
fine.
joke about it.
Or make a joke about it.
Okay,
That's a
and you
popular
know what's
one.
interesting? Look, emotionally immature adults are acting like when you're dating someone in junior high. It's
Hmm.
fine when you're dating someone in junior high not to talk about really serious things and deep topics. But when you're an adult, especially after divorce, I'm so glad you brought up the dating thing because people who are going to who are listening to this, who are going to start dating after divorce, these are things to look for. And you're right. Great, great point. Okay, last characteristic that we're going to talk about before we get into how to handle this is they adjust reality so that it does not upset them. They'll deny, dismiss, distort things they don't want to deal with. They will act and believe that a reality they will act and believe a reality that is more in line with what makes them feel better. So, how is this applicable in divorce?
I would argue that this is probably the most applicable and most common characteristic that you may see from all of them because it's so evident. So, for example, if a child is exposed to an emotionally immature person, that child may very well not prefer to go to that parent's house as often as maybe a court order says or a parenting agreement says. And so the emotionally immature person will be blaming the other parent. Well, the other parent is saying things when I'm not there, and they're telling the child these lies about me. Now, that's not to say that that doesn't actually happen. But if an emotionally immature person is saying it, then it may not actually be happening. And instead, they're deflecting the reality of the situation, that their child is basically distancing themselves from that emotionally immature parent because that parent can't understand the child's emotions. That parent has poor empathy for the child's situation. Go one step further. It's interesting here in North Carolina, we have a no fault absolute divorce. Yet, with emotionally immature people, they will constantly want to bring up, well, the other spouse is the reason for the divorce. They are to blame, etc. And that's not to say that, again, that may be the reality, but here in North Carolina, it's not exactly relevant to the absolute divorce itself, but they
Right.
still want to bring it up. They still want to shift the blame. Why? Because it makes them feel better and it has less to do with reality.
And they also blame everyone else but themselves. They can't take accountability for anything. So it's always someone else's fault. The kids don't want to come to my house because their mother turned them against me. It's, oh, maybe it's because every time you're there, you're so immature, they don't want to be around you. So I completely understand that. Before we move on to how to deal with an emotionally immature adult during your divorce, and after, I want to say something, Teresa, and I want to know if you agree with me. Don't you feel like a lot of people will call you and say, "Hi, I'm getting divorced from a narcissist"? Like that's a big buzzword. Everyone's a narcissist. Now, I'm not saying narcissism doesn't exist, but there's only a small percentage of the population that gets diagnosed with narcissism. So you might think you're divorcing a narcissist, but really you're divorcing an immature, emotionally immature person. What do you think?
I totally agree with that. Now, narcissists, by definition, will be emotionally immature people. So, narcissism is definitely a subset of emotional immaturity. But if you flip it, a lot more people could be, are in actuality, I should say, emotionally immature. And if an emotionally immature person is on the other side of a case, or you discover that this spouse that you thought you knew is an emotionally immature person and their immaturity is just coming out tenfold now that you're going through the separation and divorce process, it's really important not to fall into the trap of, well, they must be a narcissist. I'll go one step further. When it comes to legal matters, I'm not as concerned about mental health definitions unless there's a negative impact on the child custody situation, but I'm more focused on how can we address the legal needs that expose themselves versus trying to label people.
Absolutely. And that's a great segue into the next conversation that I want to have with you is how do you deal with somebody who's emotionally immature and how do you get divorced and not go completely insane and get a good divorce outcome, which is the goal. So the first thing you say is set healthy boundaries. Amen. Love
Yes.
it. So what are we talking about here?
I can't exert that boundaries word more so. I really can. I have to stress it to my clients very often of let's talk about reality, not the bubble that you have been living in this unhealthy relationship. Whether we like it or not, if you are dealing with an emotionally immature person, you're separating from them, you're divorcing them, maybe you're splitting some type of parenting arrangement with them. At the end of the day, you're trying to find a healthier next chapter. And that next chapter has to have set boundaries. And what I mean by healthy boundaries is anything from communication styles, time, where you spend your time, what you accept and respond to. We can't always control what's happening to us, but we can control how we respond. So, a great specific example is yes, your body cannot function with water, air, your breath, and food. but your body can function without responding to a text message from the opposing party. And we get that granular with our clients because more than once, some of my clients will say, well, I just have to respond to this text or this email. And in reality, you actually don't. Your existence does not depend on a response. Go one step further, especially with emotionally immature people who are not able to relate to a situation, who have poor empathy, who are not able to walk in another person's shoes. Even if you do respond, it's unreasonable to expect and unrealistic to expect that they will have a rational response.
Oh my gosh, I love this. And also, I want to say no response is a response.
That too.
That's the first thing. And secondly, this ties into your another point of how to deal with emotionally immature adults with it, which is repetition.
Mm-hmm.
So people are afraid not to respond. They're afraid it's going to piss off their ex. Well, guess what? Your ex is going to be pissed at you regardless of what you do, whether you respond or you don't respond. You are in a no-win situation. So why not respond, set the boundaries, and then repeat it. Just don't not respond to one text. Just say, I'm not responding to any of your text if I know you've been drinking,
Mm-hmm.
period. So then you just have to stick to it. Don't get really mad one night and say, I can't take it anymore and respond. You have to be disciplined. Stick to your boundaries.
Yes, and I'll take that one step further. At the end of the day, especially for an emotionally immature person, they're trying to maintain a connection and get under your skin. And
Mhm.
if you do respond and fail to repeat and fail to set your boundaries and keep them in place, as soon as they find that one string that they can pull on to elicit a reaction that they are desiring from you, then the whole scarf will unravel. And so it is key to your point. Set that boundary. If you're drinking, not going to respond, especially in separation and divorce specifically, it is critical that once you're separated or once you're divorced, and especially if you have children in common, focus on what you actually have to converse about. You do not have to converse about your 10th wedding anniversary when you're at your child's birthday party. You just don't. You don't have to go into memory lane. If the emotionally immature person goes to express their love for you or any emotion or purported emotion, maybe they're not even feeling it, you don't have to respond. You can state very bluntly, I want to converse only about our children, and that's it. And I'm not going to respond to your questions about our past relationship.
Now, this is a really good case for using the app Our Family Wizard, because if you use an app and you have it in your divorce agreement, even like a temporary, where the two of you are going to communicate through Our Family Wizard, it's a great app where you can send each other email messages, do scheduling together, share expenses. There's all these benefits to using this app. And then you don't have to ever deal with the person because everything is on record. So anything they say is going to be seen by attorneys and possibly a judge. So if you have this really immature person and it's really hard for you to communicate, I would definitely recommend Our Family Wizard.
I agree.
All right, the next tip is seek professional help. This could be the assistance of a therapist, a divorce coach, and or finding the right family law attorney. Bingo, Teresa.
Yes, I appreciate that, Jackie. And it's so true because there are a number of attorneys that may dabble in family law, or maybe they do family law, but just a certain type of family law cases, like, high asset cases, and they don't really get into the emotional side of divorce or child custody situations. And I bring up child custody a lot during our discussion today, Jackie, because when parties have children in common, unfortunately, those parties are not just going to get a divorce and be done with one another. It's just not possible because if you have children in common, you are going to be in each other's lives for as long as the child is in your life. And so I stress this for anyone with children, but you really want to seek good professional help from a family law attorney that understands emotional immaturity, understands the legal implications of dealing with someone who's emotionally immature, but go one step further, a therapist, a mental health professional, even a financial advisor or a divorce coach. All of these individuals can come back for you because if someone is emotionally immature, then they are likely not always telling the truth because the truth to them is whatever makes them feel better.
Absolutely. And I want to give a plug out to divorce coach Janine Marie Powell because I recently did a podcast with Janine, and the whole podcast is about boundaries. And so she would be a great fit if you're feeling like your ex is emotionally immature and is just not adhering to the boundaries you're trying to set up. So Janine Marie Powell is at sosdivorcecoaching.com. Okay, we have completely run out of time. I cannot believe it. But Teresa, in closing, I'm going to give you the last word. What do you want to say to just wrap it up to people who are listening to this going, yes, I have a really difficult, emotionally immature person. I'm so glad I listened to this. Can you still have a good divorce outcome and be happy after divorce?
Yes, Jackie, you definitely can. But the road is not easy. The road is ridden with a number of obstacles, especially if you're dealing with an emotionally immature person. That is why it is critical to get the right team of professionals and support on your side. Everything from a good family law attorney and a divorce coach to who are you going to be able to talk to at night when you just need to vent and maybe share a glass of wine with. Either way, though, you are not alone.
I just love it. Teresa, thank you so much for taking time. I love this conversation. I feel like it was so helpful to people.
Thank you, Jackie.
If you like what you heard and you want to reach Teresa, you can find her at modernlegalnc.com. You can fill out like her contact form. They'll get back to you that day, or you can call the firm at 704-286-6302. You can also find Teresa in the Trusted Professionals section of Divorced Girl Smiling, along with so many other wonderful divorce professionals who can help you get a good outcome in your divorce. You can also go to divorcegirlsmiling.com to listen to more podcasts, read articles, download my mobile app, or sign up for my free consult. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. We'll talk to you real soon.